Hey kids, howdy, and welcome once again to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology, and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. We are talking this week about July 8th through 14th. It's a very slim week, and actually, not only is it a slim week, there's actually some lovely transits this week. So there's not a whole lot of bumps in the road, and there's some nice energy that we're moving through. So we'll take you through all of that. But first, we will dive in and do a question. So Dorian writes, Hi-oh, thank you for what you are doing in the world and for who you both are. You're welcome. When the sun and moon match your natal sun and moon, what is the significance of this? How can someone tap into and embrace this connection? I've heard others say it's a spiritual opportunity, and I am intrigued by your opinion. Thanks again, Michael and Zoe. And again, this is from Dorian. So what I think Dorian is talking about is when someone has a solar return and a lunar return at the same time, right? So that means their birthday and sometime within close proximity to their birthday, also having a lunar return, meaning the moon comes back to the sign and placement it was at birth. So let's just talk about returns for first, to just because all planets return. And if we are talking about anything from like Saturn and inward, the returning planets are something we deal with on a regular basis. Most people have heard of the Saturn return, which is at 29 and 59, Saturn returns to where he was when you were born. That's the Saturn return, where you're going through lessons to cross the threshold into the next chapter of wisdom in your life. But everything returns, and you know your solar return by virtue of your birthday. Your solar return and birthday are synonymous. So every returning planet brings the consciousness of itself up into our sort of view. So when it's the sun, and the sun represents our centered self, the I am Michael or the I am Zoe, is the sun consciousness. And so when the sun returns to where it was when we were born, we are captivated by thoughts of the center of us, the I am Michael, the I am Zoe, otherwise known as your birthday. Right? So the solar return is a perfect way of understanding the principle of all returning planets, as long as you just switch the consciousness depending upon the returning planet that we're talking about, right? So when it's the sun, it's your birthday. You're thinking about who you are, what you've accomplished in the year behind you, what you might do in the year ahead. And so you might think of the returning sun as connecting to the factory installed data of who you are, the true you. But every 28 and a quarter days, the moon returns to where it was when you were born, and we call that the lunar return. In fact, there are astrologers who cast lunar return charts to describe the 4 weeks between lunar return and lunar return. In other words, like my moon was at 22 degrees of Libra when I was born. If I cast a chart for the month of July when the moon was at that exact 22 degrees of Libra, that would be my lunar return chart. And that would govern the 4 weeks energetically of that moment from the lunar return for the 4 weeks that follow.
Wow, I haven't heard of that one.
Well, I've used them now and then. I don't use them a lot. I've also used solar return charts where you cast a chart for the exact moment in present day when the sun is back to where it was when you were born, and then where everything is lined up in, say, 2024 is your solar return chart. It's a way of looking at the 12 years from birthday to birthday.
Yeah.
And so the lunar return chart is the same thing. You can look at a 4-week period and sort of think about how that 4-week period is going to reflect what your unconscious is brewing with, right? Solar return, conscious awareness, center of self. Lunar return, a kind of moment where you're internally having a sort of factory reset to your true settings of your, how you dial into the unconscious. The math of these 2 yearly cycles and monthly cycles will line up such that there will come a point in a person's life where they will have a lunar return right near their birthday, or what Dorian is describing as the sun and the moon match your natal sun and moon. Okay, so that's the setup. Hopefully everybody's followed me and, is picturing these phenomenon happening side by side. When I was typing out my notes for today's podcast, which includes grabbing the question from my little question file and putting it into the outline for the day's podcast, the note I wrote to myself is, it's a moment of existence itself. One of the things that happens in a life is we are created in consciousness, whole and complete, pure as an individualized expression of the dynamic collective whole that we are all part of. And we take our first breath, and where the sun is and where the moon is almost the entire picture of who we are, when you think that the sun represents our conscious awareness and the moon represents our inner life or our unconscious connections. So from just the binary of consciousness and unconsciousness that make up our individualized existence, that exists at our birth by virtue of where the sun is and where the moon is. If you happen to have a moment in your chronology when you've got sort of an inner return and an outer return at the same time, I think there is a kind of sacred spiritual reflection of that moment. You are coming into a place where you're not at the beginning of your life when the sun and the moon were there and there. You're somewhere in the middle, but you're being reminded in that moment, here's your true self, conscious awareness, sun sign placement, and here's your true inner self, unconscious placement by virtue of where the moon is. So that's why I wrote the note. It's a moment of existence itself. And yes, if you find that that's happening and you notice it, I would honor that particular lunar cycle in a kind of ceremony designed to say, this is who I am. I know who I am consciously. I know myself unconsciously to the best of my current ability to know what my unconscious is expressing. And you treat that moment as a sacred existence itself kind of threshold of reset of outer and inner, getting realigned halfway through the journey. Normally on the podcast, I'm covering the big things, the lunations, the full moon, new moons, Mercury retrogrades, other retrograde, cycles. And there just isn't a lot of that this particular week from the dates of July 8th through July 14th. Next week, that will not be the story. We will have a lot more to talk about next week, but this week it's a little slim. And I'm kind of just going to describe first just of the energy of like today and tomorrow, sort of the weekend bleeding into today, Monday the 8th, and tomorrow, Tuesday the 9th, because there's just this smattering of lovely energy all sort of hitting us at once today and tomorrow. And since I'm constantly being barraged in social media with comments and questions like, when is this going to end? It's like, here we have a kind of lovely week, kids. This is about as lovely as it's going to get, both from what I'm going to describe of today and tomorrow, and then some stuff that Venus is doing at the end of the week. So it's the loveliest energy we've had in a while, but don't forget, you're bringing your narrative with you. right? If last week was rough, this week can't be spectacular because it's not magic. Right. Okay. So what's happening today is that Jupiter, the planet of expansion and abundance, who's fairly new into his passage through Gemini, is sextiling the north node of the moon and trining the south node of the moon. That's hitting today. Jupiter transits play out with a good week or 2 weeks of influence, so this would have been building for the last week or so. And it signals a moment when our sort of abundance and expansion journey is being like amplified by the world. The world means the nodes. The nodes of the moon reflect collective experiences. And very often when the nodes are transited, it means that we're gathering with others in order to get our future created. Jupiter in Gemini tells us that we don't create abundance and manifestation in a vacuum. We need to connect with others. So the whole passage of Jupiter through Gemini will have that flavor to it because the Gemini mansion implies connection and the sharing of resources and the sharing of ideas. So it would be this week that the most movement would be possible, especially yesterday, today, and tomorrow, in terms of connecting with others, furthering your ambitions, making plans that help you guide forward. And Mercury is also sort of involved today and tomorrow, doing sort of the same energy. So what I mean by that, the same energy, is that Mercury is going to sextile Jupiter today and trine the north node of the moon tomorrow. So that means both our sense of possibility that's reflected by Jupiter's movement is saying we are moving, we are connecting with others, and we are making good progress this weekend, today, and into the next couple of days. Mercury participating says we're confident in our negotiations. Mercury sextiling Jupiter means like we're just feeling like the world is our oyster and everything that we desire is possible. And then tomorrow, Mercury trining the North Node doubles down the idea that we're connecting with others, making our plans manifest, sharing our ideas, and in that sharing, sort of enthusiastically feeling like we're making some progress and we are moving forward. Now, we are in a lunar cycle kicked off by a Cancer new moon. So we are very focused on what we need at home. And these energies feel very much like what is interesting to us out there. So I just want to remind us all month long that the lunar cycle is demanding that we put a strong emphasis on the rest, restoration, preparation, and care that we need behind the scenes. That's a Cancer sensibility. But it is so that we can climb the mountain of our desires more powerfully. Remember, we're going to go through our second Capricorn full moon next week in a row, which means that even if the Cancer new moon says focus on self-care, and what you need, it is absolutely in service of being ready to powerfully climb up those mountains with 2 full moons in a row in the sign of Capricorn. So you can expect lots of positive movement, enthusiastic conversations, and getting others interested in what you're interested in this week. So talk about your plans and see if you can't get some happy support.
You were right. It sounds so lovely.
Doesn't it? Right. You know, it is truly the loveliest energy this week, unencumbered by some of the bumpier stuff that's going on. But again, this is the second time I'm saying it. We all bring our past with us, and we meet this week with, whatever we've got in tow. But if the front part of the week is sort of mental and connection oriented with the sharing of ideas and goals, the end of the week, Thursday, Friday, is all about Venus. And you know I've been obsessed with Venus
It's the year.
since she retrograded last summer in Leo. And guess what she does this week on Thursday? She returns to Leo. Next week, she'll be back at 12 degrees of Leo, where she did her retrograde last summer. But we have come full circle. And it's really interesting to me that Venus is in Cancer now. So we start the week with our hearts aligned with the tremendous Cancerian sensibility of what do I need in terms of care in my private life so that I can, more effectively move out into the world. Venus in Cancer is going to trine Neptune in Pisces on Thursday. So as Venus is wrapping up her movement through the mansion of self-care, and she poises herself at the final mastery degree, the 30th degree of Cancer on Thursday, and connects up there with the Great Spirit at the mastery degree, 30th degree of Pisces. It's like Thursday, our hearts get the bath of self-care and preparation. It's like a ritual bath for, Persephone as she's getting ready to become, the queen of the underworld, if you will, right? And then right after that trine, Venus enters Leo. So Thursday has this rather abrupt shift of our heart centers moving from a very tender, internal, somewhat inhibited, and emotionally protective space. We move to a place where our hearts are on fire. We are lit up with desire. Venus in Leo wants to express with affection and largesse and sort of big ways of having love show up. Now, Venus will oppose Pluto on Friday. So it does mean that the very next day after Venus changes signs and brings us a little bit more warmth and grandiosity in how we feel and express love, we might run into a power struggle or two in relationship land as we finish the week out. And in a lovely week, I've been talking about how lovely a week it is. It is true that Friday, Venus's opposition to Pluto is not such a lovely transit. That's a difficult transit where power struggles and shadow material will enter the heart space. And Venus being in Leo, it might be because we are getting ready to sort of be more on fire with our feelings and led by our heart. We're not exactly shrinking back the way we would normally, or not normally, that'd be the wrong way of putting it, but organically be more inhibited and tender with Venus in Cancer because it's such an emotionally sensitive sign. The minute Venus moves into Leo, we're going to feel very different about our feelings. We're going to be much more assertive potentially with what's in our heart. And so we might bump into some, power struggles as a result of suddenly feeling the fire in our hearts ready to express in a different way. But that change happens Thursday, Friday, and from that point on, Venus will be in Leo for the next 3.5 weeks. So we get to enjoy that kind of fired up, enthusiastic way that love shows up. And I'll talk about this next week's podcast. Venus will return to 12 degrees of Leo next week, is where she started the retrograde journey last summer. So as we finish the week out and Venus re-enters the sign ruled by the sun, you might want to ask yourself, what have you learned about how you give and receive love over the last essentially 12 months of healing and investigation work? How have your relationships shifted and changed? Because I bet you they have. And are you ready to show up to your intimacy life with a little bit more fire and courage because you're lit up with the sensation of what happens when Venus moves through Leo?
Wow. This is so relevant to me personally.
Is that so?
Yeah,
Care to say more?
I've just been working on like boundaries and my sense of self, and that has really affected my relationships with other people for better or for worse in the last year.
That's going to be really then interesting for you to look at. Not this week, so, but next week or over the
Yeah.
weekend and into next week, as a result of doing that work. And Venus in Cancer for the last 3.5 weeks is really good for doing internal work that needs to happen in private spaces so that you can be more safe as you venture out. Venus in Leo will have you venturing out in intimacy, but shored up by more awareness of what you both want and desire, but also what you need in terms of protection and care.
Beautiful.
So that's all we got to talk about today, kids. I told you it was a very slim week, astrologically speaking. But before we switch into the dream segment, I want to pitch my class that's coming up on Saturday. I am adding to my astrology school with my advanced class working with Chiron. So I listen. If you follow me and you have for any minute, you will know that Chiron is my sort of jam because I'm all about healing, self-investigation, coming into greater integration of who we are through life. And I have used astrology as the biggest contextualizing tool for that, both in my own journey and as I've taught others. So working with Chiron is exactly like all of the process work that I do in my shadow classes and my self-investigation work. And so there's just so many wonderful things about working with Chiron, both from his origin story and just knowing that he's an outlier who's not from here, that he's this transorbital object that moves from the social planets out to the outer planets, which is what the definition of a centaur is. They carry us through the woods. So I'm doing a master class. It's on the 13th of July. That's a Saturday. It's 10 a.m. It's probably 3 hours live, or you can check in with the recording. But head on over to michaellennox.com if you want to advance your knowledge of how to work with Chiron, both in your chart, but also by virtue of transits. Check out my webinar on Chiron this Saturday. Go to michaellennox.com. The banner is right there in the middle of the site. Click that for more information or to register. And I hope to see some of you Saturday at 10. And otherwise, have at it.
Did you know that Michael has a daily astro alert? If you enjoy hearing the weekly astrology, you might like knowing more about each day. When you subscribe for the daily astro alerts, you'll get an in-depth explanation of the day's astrology sent right to your email. Subscriptions are only $10 a month, or you can purchase the yearly subscription at the reduced price of $100. To subscribe, head over to michaellennox.com. All right, it's dream segment time. Every week, Dr. Michael will interpret dreams that are sent in via email or take a live caller. If you would like your dream interpreted on the podcast, you can go ahead and email us at dreams@michaellennox.com. Hopefully your dream will make it onto the show.
This week we have an email dream from Nicole, and I feel like this is a very straightforward dream, and I kind of know what it is, so I'm just curious to hear you.
I love that.
Okay, Nicole writes, last night I had a dream that I was at a mall or a store. I was trying on clothes and happened to be wearing a dress I was trying on. She includes, I never wear dresses in real life. The escalator at the store malfunctioned and a lot of people fell off, including a little girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old. No one seemed to be helping her, and she was still in the way of people falling. I pulled her aside and noticed she was hurt, but no one was around to help her, like a parent. I wanted to change back into my regular clothes, but realized that she really needed help, so I tried to find someone to take care of her. I found a doctor of sorts, and they identified that she may also have some kind of cancer. I remember sitting with her, trying to figure out who she was, who she had at home, and trying to comfort her. She was often sitting on my lap or holding my hand. I felt very attached to her and sad for her. There was no resolution to the dream.
Oh, wow. This is actually a beautiful dream because to me it feels like a discovery. It feels like a discovery of a kind of an inner child aspect, and with this dream, I would go straight to Nicole. What was going on at 8 or 9 years old,
I knew it.
right? First of all, what's interesting about 8 or 9 years old is that there's a real threshold of development between the 7-year-old brain and the 8-year-old
Oh,
brain.
really?
It is at 8 years old that we think of abstract thinking comes into existence.
Okay.
Before 8, so at 6 and 7 and 5 and 4 and younger, a child can think of one thing or another thing, but it can't think of two things at the same time that sort of contradict each other. That's abstract thinking. So it's interesting that 8 or 9 years old, Nicole, would be fully formed in the mind. And clearly, it's the part of Nicole that, like, no one's paying any attention to or giving help or assistance to. Now, we start out at a mall or a store. So that's interesting. That's public spaces, right? So we're not somehow thinking about the private experience of Nicole and this inner child figure. It's more like, well, first I'd say it's about Nicole's public life because it's a public setting. But there's also something interesting about malls and stores and clothes as a place we go. So then now the mall becomes a place, or a store becomes a place where I can choose an identity that I want to try out, which we know is happening in this dream because she's wearing a dress, something that in waking life would not be typical. So if the dream is saying we're in a place that's public where you can choose however you want to express yourself, there's this young character aspect that really needs care and nurturance and attentiveness. So to me, it's interesting that dresses are feminine. So that I make a connection between wearing a dress, which is like to say, I'm going to try on the drag of softer, feminine visage into the world. And then that then connects to the idea of the softness and the gentleness needed to stop what she's doing and care for a part of her that needs some care and attention. Right? She's noticing that this child is hurt and parents are not. There's no parents anywhere. So that to me says Nicole is discovering a part of her that is probably from 8 or 9 years old that is like literally sick inside of her psyche, right? Because she also may have cancer. That's what she said. And she finds a doctor in the dream to verify that your words that you read, Zoe, were may have cancer. Is that what
Yeah.
That's what Nicole typed. May have cancer.
Yes. May also have some kind of cancer.
Right. So that's important. That's an important distinction, right? What we're discovering is that there's this new innocent character aspect of Nicole. She's absolutely compelled to sort of figure it out, knowing that parental support wasn't there to help. The fact that it may have cancer to me is important because it's like, all right, Nicole doesn't know anything about this aspect of self. She's trying to figure out who she is, why she's there, right? So that, to me, that little part of the dream where she's sitting with her trying to figure out who she is, that's self-investigation. That's shadow work. That's inner child work. I'm going to sit with you. I know you're there. I can feel you in me, but I don't know who you are, or where you come from, or why you're in the trouble that you're in. And the may have cancer to me is like, yes, Nicole, you have found a part of you that took on some heaviness of your childhood experience at around 8 or 9 that you're now set up to do some deeper inner child healing work. You're at the top of it, not at the bottom of it or in the middle of it. You're just discovering the part of you that needs the care and attention. And the fact that you end the dream with a scene of trying to figure it out, but yet feeling sad about not getting anywhere, to me, is the indication that we're talking about a process that has just started up. And while, Nicole, you may not have had this dream in the lunar cycle kicked off by a new moon in Cancer, we are reading it and interpreting it in a lunar cycle, in a Cancer new moon lunar cycle, where we're looking to do some inner child work and connecting to aspects of self that need to be held by us with more care. So this dream interpretation, Nicole, is happening inside a lunar cycle that's designed for just that scene at the end of the dream to play out. I hold this tender part of me and I try to figure out who she is and what she needs.
Thank you for listening to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. You can find us on Apple Music, the iHeartRadio app, and anywhere you find your favorite shows. Head on over to michaellennox.com for information on astrology readings, the daily Astro Alert subscription, upcoming classes, and to join the mailing list.